So for those of you that are here, thank you. I thought since we had this in Atlanta this year, a really unique opportunity was to get a chance to talk to all the people that have actually made the game that we have enjoyed for the last 19 years. So I'd just kind of like to take a time to introduce everybody. To my far right is Joe Carriker, one of the most recent developers of Vampire the Requiem. To my near right is Andrew Greenburg. Andrew was the very first developer of Vampire the Masquerade. To my far left is Jen Hartshorn. She came after Andrew and is perhaps best known for her contribution of essentially creating Vampire the Dark Ages. Next to Jen is Rob Hatch. Rob added always the most horrific elements to the original Vampire the Masquerade franchise. It's a compliment. And next to him is Will Heinmarch. Will was also a Vampire the Requiem developer. And to my immediate left, my arch nemesis, made in my existence, the only developer of both Vampire the Masquerade and Vampire the Requiem, Justin Achilli. So I'll kind of keep this kind of free form. I didn't have anything particularly scripted. Something I thought would be interesting to kind of do initially was for people just to kind of give maybe an early example of something that they felt was particularly special about the franchise. And I'll just start to my right.
No pressure. Yeah.
Well, the developers are all pretty special.
Well, I have to say I come at this from the unique experience of having had the opportunity to play this game since I was younger, and all the way through adulthood, and having kind of seen it on both sides. I think the most amazing thing that we got out of Empire was the way it changed the gaming industry in general. I mean, the fact that it literally acted as a gateway for people who probably would have never even picked up one of these funny little shaped dice, other than to taunt their younger brother about it maybe, were willing to show up and not just play within the sort of paradigm of the of the industry, but to take it into entirely new directions. And so having had the opportunity to kind of sit and watch that from both the sidelines and now in the middle of it, it's, to this day, it fascinates me.
Well, I had an even more unique experience of not being able to play this before we developed it. So there was a lot of very interesting parts about it. I think that is one of the most interesting parts of being able to form this whole cloth out of essentially nothingness. It was one of the stories I talk about when we first started talking about Vampire the Masquerade was at first they say, oh, that's boring. All you do is be a vampire, and then just the limitless possibilities of what you could explore with this game came to mind. It was just overwhelming what we really could do with this game. So I'm glad we were able to tap into some of that potential that was out there for it.
I got into it to date goth chicks.
How'd that work out?
Real bad. Real bad.
That's right, he came in with unlost or was there?
Well,
As far, the question is something special about Vampire, right?
Yeah.
Not why we got into it.
I didn't hear the question.
something special about the product that you worked on, not goth chicks.
What I enjoyed about it most was that it came out of a literary tradition that you saw a little bit in other role-playing games that come out of things like, your fantasy is the big role-playing game genre, and you're emulating things like Beowulf and King Arthur and things like that, but this really had a much more emotional approach to it. It wasn't as much about tactics, it was more about the feeling of a time, it was about the emotional experience of something happening to you, it was about something bad happening and weirdly you finding something good in that something bad, even if that something good led you back to the something bad anyway. And it really kind of corresponded to a lot of what I was doing at the time anyway, so
something bad.
Sort of like going to work and having therapy.
For me, it's definitely the mashup to me, of the traditional, almost the fantasy element, the vampire mystique, the supernatural, superstitious folklore, and then the stuff that comes completely out of left field, and it was very modern and very unpredictable. So that you would be reading these vampire books and never had any idea where they were going. Like you could sense where they were coming from, but they would. I guess what we could now say a mashup, right? Although I kind of hate that term because it takes some of the magic out of it. But that weaving of the two forms, old and new, into something that was both respectful of kind of where vampires came from. It was informed. It was kind of literary, but that wasn't beholden to any of that stuff. And it was still always capable of surprising, and this is the big thing to me, was capable of helping storytellers learn how to surprise their players and themselves in new ways. That what happened between, it was the biggest gap I'd ever seen between book and play in the best sense of the word, and that play was a whole head above those books just from what the books taught you to do with them. But the books were really aiming the players to be bigger than what they had originally read about, what they had been just sort of talking about doing. And so everybody built into this one massive play experience that was bigger than any one of them. And I always thought that was cool.
Mr. Hatch.
Justin wasn't dating any goth chicks because they were all dating me. I think they've covered a lot of it. I'll go along with what was said that, I think that the whole idea of a storytelling game versus a role-playing game, to some degree it's a marketing tagline, but in a way not as much either, because, I do think it's one of those games where for the first time the form followed the story rather than the story following the form, and we were able to come up with what we wanted to do and really take the plot and the theme in a direction that we wanted to take it, and then build the rules around. Wow, can you hear me out there? Yeah. Okay. And then build the rules around those things and hope they worked. And I just think it was different in that sense, but again, I think they've kind of covered a lot of those points.
You two have to share.
Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm also in agreement on a lot of the literary stuff, obviously. But one of the things that I thought was most interesting that was really getting going after the first couple of years is the way that it integrated live role-playing with an actual tabletop game, and where there was actual, participation from the company, rather than, I started doing LARPs 19 years ago, maybe more, I'm not sure. But I had done, like boffer LARPs, run around the woods and hit people first, before I ever got into Vampire. And the idea of an actual, a LARP that you had all this enormous amount of source material that you could go to, and the idea that you can, play a LARP with people in Europe or whatever, and that you all got a common frame of reference. I think that's one of the best things for me.
Yeah, I'd actually like to run with what both Rob and Jen have been talking about. And it's funny, when we were first coming up with the storyteller system, I always said the first storytelling game I ever played was, anyone ever played Tunnels and Trolls? I said that was the first storytelling game because the rules were so bad you couldn't do anything but use it to tell stories. I loved the game, but it really wasn't a very workable system. And one of the things we did try to do with Vampire, and I think worked remarkably well, was whenever we game, really we're creating stories together, but there are a lot of old-time gamers who don't want to admit that. No, we're gaming, we're doing the tactical side, but really we're creating stories. And more importantly, we as the Vampire developers are creating a mechanism for other people to create stories that we might never know about. And I think the most special thing for me are the stories that came out of Vampire that we never conceived of. And some of them were ludicrously bad, but many more
We published
really
a lot of
imagined
that, by the way.
and really deep. No, I'm not talking about anyone who's here.